Alright guys, I'm going to run through importing the building effects rig. So here we are in a empty max scene. It's raw. I don't have any presets saved, so it's default everything. So I'll run through to set up the scene to make sure the rig runs appropriately. So first off, we will go to customize unit setup. This is probably the most important thing to start off with, since the rig is built in a very relative world scale. So we'll start with 1 unit equals 0.1 meters. Okay, things will run a lot smoother once you have that. So secondly, let's I'm going to change the frame range. Go down here to key toggle to 1000 to 1200. It's a force of habit. In the film industry, we always usually we start with 1000 so we can give room for pre-roll. Next we'll do film. We'll set that to 24 frames, and actually we'll fix the start frame 1000, 1200. Okay. Now we should be good to bring in the assets. Alright, so let's make a new layer. Let's call this 07, just because I like the way I like to name the layers, TP. Okay, we will go to Particle Systems, Thinking, and we'll throw that out there in the middle, zero that out. All right, let's open up the properties here, the UI. Select the master dynamic. We're going to show simulation start user defined 1001, or this will be relative to, but depending on your start frame. So if you're at 0, make sure you start this at 1. Okay, so 1001. I'm going to set this to per half frame, since the jointing is it gets calculated at a much more accurate level when you raise the subsampling above per frame. So turn these off. Okay, and we will go to load. Get to your black box building effects rig, and we're going to open that. So I'll run through this hierarchy in a minute. Well, let's we get that's set up in here. We'll close that. Make sure we now we want to import. I want to import the actual asset building. So the actual building asset. All right, we're going to go into File, Import, Merge. We're going to make sure you're in your directory. I'm going to get to the building asset. So just make sure you hit all and OK. All right, here we go. Let's make sure we turn this off. All right, so you can always just double check to see everything's named, positioned. Turn off TP. And then also what's pretty important is your master node. All it is just all the pieces linked together to one node, and also this will play a pretty significant role in the rig itself. So we'll get into that, but okay, so just make sure everything there. Just walking through it, we have pretty standard and basic geometry or asset layering here. Nothing too crazy, but the purpose of this is to demonstrate the amount of layers you can add into this. So it's pretty flexible. You can always add in there. I encourage you to see how much stuff you could fit inside here, like furniture, pretty much anything, and any kind of appendages you want to attach to the building too. It's always always adds for more interesting simulations, so towers and whatnot. And also the purpose of the flexibility of this is built specifically to be robust and interchangeable. So it's modular in a way where you can bring in your own assets and open it up to that expansion as much as you want. But I'm going to turn off all the high res and get the proxy. So just running through this, the purpose of this is keeping it pretty simple. You could always add extra layers if you needed to, especially if depending on the building itself or the structure itself, how much complexity you need. But this is essentially the cage where all the joints will happen, and really all this one needs is pillars and floors split up pretty uniformly. So doesn't need to be too crazy as far as detail, but try to get as much as you can. But that's essentially it. And what these are going to do are joint themselves together. They're going to create a set of surface particles, and those will store data on each other, linking themselves to its parent and child and whatnot. So let's do one more thing here and set up a collision environment. And that would just be a box. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, well, we'll get back to that, but so let's bring this stuff into TP. Let's turn these off. Open up the properties here. Okay, I'm going to right-click System, make sure that's off for debugging and testing here. So start with the pillars here. Let me just run through this hierarchy real quick. So what we have for groups, we're starting with 0, 0. That would be the cage. Anything that's non-renderable and essentially the driver of the whole system starts up here. And again, you can always add extra groups to add detail, or depending on what you have imported and how much you want to add onto it. Ground objects is obviously anything on the type of ground you want to throw in here, but it's important to know that you're going to have to set this to tracking, instanced, and group it in here. That's just simply because my initial setup with the cliff had all neutron objects moving. So if you just have a static ground, you don't have to worry about tracking. So for one, I'm going to import the ground, set this to instance shape, and neutron ground object. Okay, that's done. Next, I will import the pillars here. Okay, change effects all, instance shape, and I don't have to set that because I have it set into the node here. And I'll do the same thing with the floors. All right, do the same here. Change effect to all, instance shape. That should be good. Okay. So we got that. Let's turn on TP. All right, let's go with the first frame. All right, so that's in there. Okay, so this is where the cool stuff is. You got the system. I'm gonna turn that on. The purpose of this here is you want to select the master node first thing. I will explain what that does in a second. So if we go to the first if we go to the first frame again, you'll see that everything is got a bunch of particles all around here. So first off, the reason we have this selected is so what this is this value here dictates the amount of joints that happen relative to the master node on the z vector or the up vector. So if we raise this value to 150, it's hard to see, but here, let's turn off edit on the fly. Do that again. So we'll put this to 0. You can see this update. So what this does is it creates a distance from the node up 150 units, and it creates a much stronger joint strength. So the purpose of that is if you have let's say you're running through an earthquake, the base of the building is a lot stronger, so it's a lot harder to break, and that's generally the properties in real world events. So usually the base of the building is a lot stronger. So it's not too complex on how it's working, but again, I'll run through what's going on. So right here, I have this split up through. This is where I'm telling it to look for the base node and move itself up based on certain values and thresholds from the z vector. These here you can go in and adjust. If I wanted to adjust the amount of joint count and strength on each of the layers. So let's say floors. Let's throw this up to 1. You'll see the floors update with a lot more particles. So there you go. So they are separated. So that's kind of the beauty about this whole system, is you can separate them all per groups. I'm gonna put this back to 1.7, and just be careful, because the higher you go, the first frame will evaluate. It'll take a long time. So I've got it set at a pretty decent, pretty forgivable set of values. So let's just do it again at 1 on the pillars. We could see these update. A little hard to tell because they're so small, but they're there. Let's just put this at 0.2. So the cliff would be essentially where you saw in the teaser trailer. That would be the floor. So if you wanted to, so the idea is each of the groups get spawned a lot of surface particles, and those surface particles are storing their parent as a variable, going to the next set of rules and creating kind of like look at me joints, or look at me particles. Those essentially go into another set of logic, and then we'll create the joint. We just have some gravity here and a chain collision for the dynamics engine. So once we cache this, go on to our next. We're going to have we got your high res attach here. So once you have this cached, which actually let's create some movement here. So let's pretend we have this thing as an earthquake. Just select the box. Let's add some noise rotation here. Turn off TP. Okay. Let's create a bit of an earthquake here. I have a really gnarly one. Let's keyframe this down here so we can let the building settle. So we'll do the same thing with the position list, noise, position. And keyframe this. Okay. Now you'll remember you'll have to go into the ground and set this to object to particle tracking, or else you won't see the ground movement. Okay, let's start off with, turn this off. Okay, so we've got everything imported. Let's save it. Okay, so we've got that all set. If we just play back, that's another thing, forgot to set. Make sure you set real-time playback off. All right, here we go. So I will say the first frame will take a bit because it's evaluating all the surface area, finding each parent, child, and so on. But once it gets past that, it should be relatively quick. All right, things shaking around. So let's actually cache record this. Just gonna right click, cache record. All right, let's check this out. So boom, and the thing starts to collapse. Cool. And if we up this value anymore, we could essentially strengthen the base. And again, we can actually take these values and lower them more if you want to loosen the joints. So, all right, so we have the cage. Let's turn to our high res, attach, import these. Turn these off here. Start with the concrete. Concrete. Instance shape. Do pillars. Instance shape. Walls interior. Instance shape. And window. Not the windows yet. Floors. Cut. Instance the shape. Okay, same with the proxies. Need to create to store group ID integers. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so what this is going to do, it is going to first look at the cache before it, the proxies, and it will find its nearest particle. And that's just looking at its pivot and attaching itself. Here, we are referencing that data, and we're grabbing that reference and p-attaching it. Here, what I'm doing is based on its velocity and spin. It's going to end up going to a volume breaker. And this x to 1 splits up the group to its corresponding active group. So in the hierarchy, we're starting with all these neutron high res being attached to the proxy. And then essentially, once it reaches a certain type of threshold, that is when it breaks onto these and just becomes active. And that runs through another shape collision dynamic engine. We got gravity and then position killing. So this just says at 0, 0, 0, anything about underneath it, it kills it. So you can always adjust that if it needs to be higher or lower, or just completely turn off, but that saves for calculation. So we'll cache this. I might just cache a little bit since it might get pretty heavy, but we'll see how it does. Okay, so I'm gonna stop it. It's about 1083 frame. Okay, so we got that. Let's see how that looks. Turn on TP. Just for the sake of it, let's turn off visibility for pillars and floors. The high res show mesh was off. These were as well. Okay. So play that back. This looks pretty good. So it's working appropriately. It's neutrons attached, and so this is pretty cool. All right, so we're gonna leave it like that, and we're gonna try the windows. Windows work sort of similar to the high res, although they add a little bit more complexity due to what I did. So with the windows, I created a system where all the concrete area has surface particles here, and they're attached to the neutron concrete. What those do is they will, once the windows crack, the edges of the window will will look for the surface particles and then stick themselves or attach themselves to them. So it keeps the edges of the windows, broken glass, attached, because just adds that level of complexity. Once you break a window, normally the edges kind of stay on there. So it's just a center area that could be adjusted to your pleasing however you want in here. So here's the volume break. Here is the attachment. It looks for first the Windows neutron, then the reattach. So this is where they will find the surface position and attach themselves to that right there. Just have some basic forces, same kill position, gravity, kill position, and again, shape collision. So again, let's cache this, see how this looks. Actually, before that, let's import the windows themselves. And just for the sake of it, I want to make sure we create the group ID as 4. So change effects all, instant shape. let's make sure that works. So turn off cache 1 and system. Cool. So they are working. Turn on system and cache 1. And here's the windows. If you just play that back. So the black particles there are the surface position. Also, the windows, once broken, have a spherical force on them. So per one frame. So you could always adjust that, turn that down a bit. Actually, let's do that. Put that to about 35. And let's save this and cache it. See how this looks. That should be enough. Let's do about right there. The windows might take a bit longer, so you'll have to be patient with that. That might just be an overnight thing. Along with the debris here, that'll take a bit longer too, but it does look really good. So here is the windows. So those will break, and the edges will look for each other. If you're having a hard time, and then okay, that works. So the green, that would be the edge still sticking. The blue or turquoise. Go group here. Yeah, A Windows 02 and Windows broken. So those are essentially the edge pieces, and the green there, searching and then finding their finding their attachment. And for your breaking thresholds, those would be velocity and spin. So you can mess with these values here to decide how easy they break or how much they want to strengthen and stay there. All right, so the last one we have is debris, which I can see if I can cache a bit, but this might take the longest time to calculate. But if you could set this overnight, it's worth it. It really looks good. But this would just be, it's relatively simple. Just taking the O1 active group. So neutron active, windows, neutron active, and secondaries active. So we're taking the O1 active, anything in here, we're just emitting position born into debris. That has a kill position with the gravity, and here is it runs through a flow solver, and this is a very low smoothing radius, so it doesn't look too liquidy, and it also has your boundary. I set it to 01 high res. You can adjust that if it gets too heavy, but it's a great system for collisions. And here's your flow solver. So let's just cache that really quick, see how long this takes for what I have here. Okay, let's see what frame 1030 looks like. Make sure it's on ticks. Okay. Oh, I need to fix some of that. So this is a little too thick and fluidy, but you'll have to turn down the viscosity. And the smoothing radius a lot. And that's also relative to the size of the building too. So you have to generally keep those a lot down. And also the tension, turn down the tension, and then that should be good. But smoothing radius, tension, viscosity are your big ones for depending on your fluid or the look you want for that debris. But put those real low to get those generally really dry looking dirt, but the boundary will work out the collisions. And plus it just looks really natural. So after you have that cached, actually you'll want to turn this on before you cache it. This is the shape attach. This just has a geometry instance, so you'll have to bring in your own type of debris. I recommend super low poly. And then this runs through this curve is the size. So you have a small percentage of them are larger, so it creates a nice natural variation of size. So that is the run through with the hierarchy. It's a multi-cached system. I know you'll have to manage each of these caches, but it gives you the ability to have extremely flexible control. So any one of these you can art direct enough to go back recache, but essentially once you get a solid look with the cage, the jointed cage, you will be able to then move on forward and create much quicker iterations of a look for the high-res stuff. So this is probably the most efficient way, one of the most efficient ways I've used to create quick iterations and a nice, natural, solid look using this type of cage. And then once the high-res is in there, you can pretty much build on top of that. So yes, and then here is the group structure for the joints. You got utilities in here, surface position, any kind of extra particles, activators, markers you can throw in there. And here's the all the groups for the joints. But it's a very nicely managed system, and it's worked out for me really, really well. Last but not least is the memory master. This stores all my your variables. Do not delete that. Do not. So this should be here all the time. But cool. That is the building effects rig. So hope to see some pretty badass sims. Thanks, guys.